You have lived and worked in places that we would consider liberal democracies, places like the US or Canada. You've also lived and worked in places we would consider to be illiberal democracies. In your view, what are the biggest differences between these systems? And what is an illiberal democracy?
There are a lot of people who think an illiberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. You can't have a democracy unless it's liberal. And by liberal, I don't mean capital L liberal, permissive, relativist. I don't mean people like me, right? Liberal means something technical. It means you've got courts, you've got a right of appeal, you've got constitutional rights, you've got a free press. That's what liberal democracy means. And a lot of people nowadays in the 21st century think democracy simply means majority rule. It simply means elections. And I think the right way to think about democracy is it is majority rule, certainly. It's a free election, certainly. But it's also independent judiciary, a free press, regulatory agencies that are not captured by big corporations. It means a lot of things to keep us free. And in my case, because I run a university, it means free universities, universities that are free to teach and learn whatever they want. Now, I currently work in what is called an illiberal democracy in Hungary. Hungary is a wonderful country. I married a Hungarian, so I'm pretty fond of Hungary, right? But they do not have a free press, or it's almost been crushed. They don't have an independent judiciary. Not really. They say they do. It looks like one, but believe me, it does what the government tells you. And as a consequence, they don't have free universities. I'm trying to keep a free university in Budapest, a university in which we can choose our curriculum. We can teach what we want to teach. We can admit who we want to admit. Not a lot of people associate democracy with universities, but believe me, a university is part of what makes for a free society. So I'd say there's no such thing as an illiberal democracy. It's a contradiction in terms. You either have a democracy with those institutions, or you start not to have any democracy at all.
What is the distinction between an illiberal democracy and an authoritarian government?
Well, Stephanie, what Mr. Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, would say is, I'm not an authoritarian. I was democratically elected, and that's true. So I'm not an authoritarian leader, I'm a democratically elected leader. And there are a lot of countries like this. You know, Poland is like that. There's some people who say other countries are coming to be Turkey. Yeah. These are countries where you have a single leader who says, I'm a Democrat because I was elected by the people. But he uses, here's the point, he uses democracy to crush democracy. He gets power, and then he neutralizes the media. He neutralizes the courts. He locks up dissenters. He shuts off the universities. He says he's a Democrat, but he's been using democratic means to shut off democracy. And that may be the most single dangerous thing that's happening in the 21st century right now.
Well, a lot of political scientists, Michael, used to say that a well-established democracy was not at this risk, that once firmly established, it was very unlikely to slide into authoritarian systems, if you'd call it that. So are there early warning signs for citizens of a democracy to look at as far as whether their government may be backsliding into the conditions we're seeing in a place like Hungary?
Yeah, there are a lot of warning signs. One of them is if they start passing legislation that makes it impossible for universities to operate freely. Universities are kind of canaries in the mine. When you start cutting back on academic freedom, you start there and you end up cutting back everybody's freedom. The press be another example. If the press starts shutting down or the press is unable to function freely, that's a bad sign that pretty soon democracy itself will be in danger. Declining turnout is another sign.
Voter turnout?
Yeah, if you have elections where nobody shows up, that's not a good sign, you know. We get turnouts in some elections in the United States and Canada which are below 50%. You know, how are those elections legitimate if a majority of people don't turn out. That's a sign of problems. Another sign is gerrymandering to get to it, where you construct electoral districts in such a way that it favors one party and builds in a party political advantage that can't be shaken by elections. That's a bad thing. Let me go further, money in politics, where you have just, Bob Dylan says money doesn't talk, it screams. There are times when money screams in politics. And that's a problem right across the world. And any democracy has to control money, because money is not speech, in my humble opinion. Money is power. And you got to control money, power in politics, or you don't have free elections. So all of this stuff. And I guess what I would say is that we get complacent that democracy is something that's just there. The institutions will just always work, no matter how venal, no matter how corrupt, no matter how terrible our politicians are. I have a different view of this, having worked in countries where democracy is more fragile. I've seen democracy fall apart. And if it can fall apart in small countries, it can fall apart in big ones too.